First of all, I have a list of thank yous. I want to say thank you here at URI to Don DeHaze, our provost, and Ann Vieger, our vice provost for academic affairs. They are the people who put up the money for us to be able to bring visiting artists here, so thank you to them. Jeanette Riley, the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and Nedra Reynolds, the Associate Dean of Arts and Sciences, for their support, including their support in the Champlin Grant that brought us all of this equipment. We would not have been able to do any of this 1 year ago because we didn't have a thing that we're using today. The cameras, the screen, the sound system, none of it. So thank you to them. From San Francisco Ballet, Deborah Bernard, thank you, the general manager there. Juliette LeBlanc is the company manager. Danielle St. Germain Gordon is their Chief Development Officer and was instrumental in getting this put together. Ben Estabrook is the digital content producer and was the one who helped to make sure we're going to have the film to be able to show you today. Oh, there are Miles. There's Miles and there's Kevin. Hi. They'll tell us why they came in just a second late here in a minute. I did want to thank Miles and Kevin, actually, because their work in San Francisco got everyone else on the panel to believe that I was real and not a spam email. So thank you to them. And here in the Department of Music, I did want to thank Ethan Hicks, who is the Senior Information Technologist for Tech Services, who's helping with all of the sound and video, Jacob Wolf, our Concert Manager, and Jessica Peabody, our Fiscal Clerk, who also helped prepare the program. For those of you who are here in the house with me, because this will be recorded and released later, I wanted to let you know we prepared a QR code on the door as you go out. You can scan that and you can get a full program with links to bios and to reviews of the show and to other information about the ballet. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. I'll be welcoming our panelists here very soon, but I wanted to do something sort of unique here first. I wanted to say welcome to our panel by doing something kind of special. I wanted to thank them for the work that they put in over the past year, and I realized as we thank them that this is likely the first applause that they've heard from a live audience in over a year. So could you? So welcome and thank you to all of you. That was really generous of you and your time. So I'm going to try to go around, sort of a round robin, and make sure I ask questions of everybody and then kind of come back and we'll start a conversation. I'm sure we'll go off of my script very soon. But I wanted to start with Miles, because this is a new area for almost everybody in here, I think. We have representatives from almost every field but dance, which I think is one of the points of the film. So Miles, can you just tell us a little bit about how it started, how a commission works when you're doing something for a ballet?
Yeah, of course. First of all, thanks for having us. I'm super excited to be chatting with all of you, and apologies that we have to wear a mask. We're in the ballet building right now, just coming from company ballet class. So, but we're excited to make it here. Yeah, so the usual process for a theater commission. Choreographer and oh, can you hear me okay?
Now I can. Now I can. You froze. You said the usual process, and then we didn't get to hear what it was.
Yeah, yeah, that's behind the paywall. No, the usual process is our artistic director, and in this case, Helgi Thomason, will approach a choreographer and basically commission one of us for a theater work in a future season. So by the time the pandemic hit, which was, for us, we were shut down March 16th of last year, I was already expecting to do new work for the stage, but I was super early on in my creative process, so which I feel pretty fortunate for procrastinating there because it really allowed me to pivot once I learned that this was going to be a digital work. So I thought this was a super unique project for me because I've worked with film before, but it's rare that I will create a kind of a longer length of a piece that is specifically for a digital platform. You know, I've kind of transformed some theater works to the digital platform, but this was a really unique opportunity, I think, to like band together with a lot of different pieces and make something that was specifically for film. So that's something that got me really excited and has definitely been a major silver lining for me through this really tough year that we've had.
Absolutely. I understand from some of the interviews that I read that you chose the music fairly early on. Is that right?
Yeah, I probably had settled on the music in, I don't know, Martin, probably this early summer, spring or summer, maybe April or May. And I remember having a meeting with our in-house lighting designer, kind of just about the feeling, Jim French, just about the feeling of the piece and kind of what I was planning to do on stage and my inspirations then, and how I wanted to have this big, massive cast. And of course, you know, once we realized where the season was going, we had to rethink everything. But yeah, that was definitely a main. Usually, I start with music. I think it's so indicative of what the piece is going to be, and it also just informs me of even all of the like emotional cues and the concept and everything. So it's really important for me to have that nailed down as soon as possible.
Now, I know from some interviews that I've read that this can happen different ways. Sometimes I know Martin West, the music director for San Francisco Ballet and principal conductor for them, for their orchestra. I know sometimes you're actually consulting on the pieces. Was this a case where you recommended something, or did he bring it to you?
Oh no, Miles brought it to me, but he did. I think he came with 2 or 3 ideas, didn't you, Miles? And I gave my feedback on each of the pieces. I mean, thank God we chose this one, to be honest, because we've had a tremendous difficult, like everybody else. Orchestras cannot play together, and so especially wind players and brass players are not allowed to be in the same room as anybody else at the moment. So it makes it. It was great, in fact, that Miles ended up choosing a piece which didn't involve any wind and brass. It didn't make it easy, but it made it at least possible.
So that's an interesting part of this, is that you had to take into consideration all of the COVID protocols, and the Reich piece is for 3 different string quartets, 4 vibraphone players, and 2 pianists. But I noticed from the credits that you used 1 pianist, which means you had to dub at least once. How did that all work?
Well, yes, it's been very challenging to play together. So the protocols in San Francisco, in fact, the whole of the area, I don't know about the rest of the country, but we weren't allowed to have more than 12 people in the room at any time. And the piece calls for 20 people. So immediately we knew that we wouldn't be able to record it all at once. So we had basically 2 days where we had, the first day we had the 4 vibraphones and the 1 pianist. And we put her in the booth because the piece is you'll hear the piece, it's very complex rhythmically. And when you don't play together, no matter how great you are, it's very difficult to fit with someone else if you can't hear what they're doing. So we had the 4 vibraphones and the piano in one room. And then the next day we came back and all the string quartets were very spaced out in a huge room, the Skywalker Studios. And we had the same pianist come back, sit in the booth, and play the other part. So she gets 2 credits on the thing. It was one way of keeping the number of people down. So it was a really challenging thing. And we did it to click track in order to keep the tempo the same. I agree. I talked to Miles beforehand. We talked about the speeds that it could go. He had a recording that he'd used to choreograph to. I had some issues with some of the things on it, and we like in that process, we had a chat about it, and we came to a sort of conclusion about what was going to work and what wasn't. And yeah, so then we recorded on 2 days, and then the magic of editing and hours and hours of editing. Not me personally, Leslie Ann Jones, who produced it, did an amazing job. She's a multi-Grammy award-winning producer editor, runs the Skywalker studio, and we just went back and forth, hours and hours, saying, "How about this? How's this sound?" And I'll go, "No, the piano is like a 16th early. This is the string quartets are not lining up here." And in fact, there's one bit where I don't know which version of the film you have. Unfortunately, the film was released with a slightly wrong version of the music, whereas there's so many complex things that we ended up this one line missing on one of the what they used originally. But it's all fixed now. Hopefully you get the right one. And only I noticed.
They just
probably,
sent it to us today. They just sent it to us today, so we should have the
oh,
right one.
excellent. And listen out for the string quartet 2 and first viola and cello towards the end. It's fantastic.
Great. Well, I'm glad we have the right one now. So moving to a different aspect of the film, I thought I would go to Ricardo Campos, who is the director of photography for the film. And just talk me through how you work through the early phases of this. You were part of the walkthroughs, the site locations. What's your part in the beginning?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thanks for having us here. This is really cool to be able to, talk about this project outside of kind of having been in this bubble where we're all just collaborating amongst ourselves and we can't really share it with other people, et cetera. So it's nice to be able to chat about it a little bit. So I was actually brought on pretty late into the game, as usually happens with a DP in a project like this. There's a lot of like higher level decisions that are being made before the job kind of comes my way. And when the job was approached to me, the music was already locked down. I had not the final version of the score, but I had at least what the format of 17 minutes would sound like. And that was really interesting. Usually I'm sent more visual references, but I grew up playing music since I was like 8 years old. So to me, getting a piece of music is much more inspirational than getting a deck of images or something. You immediately start to feel just the overall mood, I think, much more in depth with music, especially when you're working with like an orchestral score like this, where there's so many lines and, the melodies moving up and down, and it just opens up a whole nother world of possibilities for when you're thinking about the edit and the cut. And I know that that's something that was really specific for our director, Ezra, as well. But yeah, so when the job came to me, there was already, all of these locations were already chosen. I had a pretty good sense of what the narrative was already. I saw a deck that was shared by Miles from the Ballet, and it broke everything down into more general beats within these different rooms in the MoMA and in the Opera House, which we kind of converted into a soundstage to shoot this. We weren't really using it as a traditional opera house. And then from there, that's kind of where I come in and I start to bring more specificity to how exactly we're going to achieve, what's down on this paper from more of a camera movement and a lighting standpoint. But it was wonderful. I mean, it was such a great way to end the year in December. It was, I was in San Francisco for just over 3 weeks doing this project. So it was a really special experience being able to meet everyone at the Ballet and just really get into that like super specific, like orchestra heavy music and, just talking dance, that was really cool. That was something I didn't have a chance to do before. I've definitely shot a lot of music videos that incorporate dance, but this was a much more traditional, way of doing it.
Great. I'm going to have some questions for you later about some of the top secret stuff that I was trying to figure out with the filming, and you can either tell me or not.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I'm an open book. No worries.
So Susan Romer, I think this is the first review of a ballet or maybe an opera in which every single review has mentioned the costuming. And so congratulations for that. You'll see why in a few minutes. Obviously, you were scouting very early. Did you go regularly? How did that work? How many times did you have to go?
Go to see the dancers, or?
No, I'm thinking about like the location. The color palette is incredible, and it's very related to what goes on in the museum, right? And so I'm just curious, did that require a lot of visits? How did you do that?
Yeah, great question. Also, thank you again. I have to just point out that Miles not only assembled a cast of dancers, which he normally does, but he also assembled this whole cast of so many other artists and craftsmen that worked on this film. And for us, it's like, it's not normal that we get to work with so many different artists who are so good at what they do. So thank you, Miles. So I guess in a way, I mean, I'm so familiar with the MoMA, especially that it was mostly Miles had like a few pictures right off the bat that he just snapped from his iPhone on some of the first visits. And those were just so striking to me that I think part of what really clicked and what resonated for both of us was the fact that we'd be using two spaces that are, in a way, they are themselves an empty canvas. So like Ricardo was saying, like the opera house was like became something totally different. And that's kind of how we work more typically, is that you can create something from nothing. So kind of using the base of the MoMA with some white and black and very sort of expected colors that you would see in a museum, very stark. We kind of like splashed color all over that. So that, and then we kind of I just felt like I could run with it and just pick the colors that I really loved. And I felt like highlighted or accentuated the story that Miles was telling. But it was fun, and COVID made it kind of difficult to be able to be everywhere all the time. So it was a lot of talking back and forth. What did you see? Or like doing research online, or trying to find ways to access the information that we needed and kind of cobble it together.
Wow, I'm gonna come back and ask you some top secret stuff too that you can either tell me or not. But thank you. I wanted to get to Kevin. Cav, hi. I hope class went well for both of you.
It went well.
My question for you at first is, you're brought into this process pretty late. Around what time did you start to find out? When did you find out you were cast?
I think it was sometime in August, I believe, was around the time. We had a lot of build up to rehearsals, because San Francisco is pretty strict with their lockdown procedures, and so we were barely allowed to be taking class for most of the time. And then I can't remember if it was sometime in August or late.
It's maybe September.
It might have been September that we were actually told what the casting might be. And even then it was still pretty vague how it was going to work. You know, we at first we're like, are we allowed to touch each other? Are we, you know, but so it was probably sometime in September.
And in regard to that, what was the solution that the ballet company eventually came up with for this particular time period when you were filming?
Yeah, so we all have to be masked. There's a screening, like I think most people are used to when you get in the building, that has a list of questions that you have to answer correctly, no or yes, whether you have symptoms or not. There's a temperature screening. And then you have to go wash your hands the second you're allowed in the building. And then you'd go directly to the floor. We have 4 floors here, and we usually use 2 of them mainly. And so we would go directly to the floor, and then each studio by the bar where we would start our class, there's actually a square taped out by each spot that you're allowed to stand at, that you can put your own personal items in. And then the bar itself is taped out, so you can only use that bar. And then everyone's advised to stay about 12 feet away from each other when dancing, 6 feet otherwise. And the only time you'd be able to take off your mask or anything like that is to drink some water and then quickly put it back on. And then on top of that, we're actually tested Monday, Wednesday, and Friday every week. And it's a spit test. So that goes through the mail. And they receive that sometime later that night or the next day. So we get those results. If we were to test on Monday, we get the results late Tuesday night. So if there was a positive test, we would know pretty quickly, which would have alleviated a lot of stuff. And luckily our pod never had any sort of issues. And then at the end of class or end of rehearsal, you had to make sure that you wipe down all the bars, wipe down your spot with all the personal items. So there's a lot that went into just getting in the studio, not even rehearsing with people.
And then doing all the dancing with the mask on, right? I mean, that's hard to imagine. So there were, one thing that you may not realize if you're not familiar with the dance world is that out of necessity, you have to have two casts for things, because if somebody gets injured, you have to have somebody who can step in. So there's an entire cast that learned this entire piece that will not be seen. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm partial to working with two different casts anyway, especially in a new creation. Um, I think it allows for a lot more in different interpretation, which usually informs and kind of like helps me choreograph. I'm a very collaborative person in the studio, I think, and I really love when dancers make their own decisions or make mistakes, and we kind of steal them and and change and adapt. And I think especially there might be an opportunity for this piece to also be performed on stage. So I was really working with them and making individual decisions for them and how they dance and who they are and what their strengths are as dancers. So even between the casts, the piece feels beautifully different. And I think there's something really exciting about that living aspect of this art form is when we're in the theater, the work is constantly kind of shifting and evolving. And I think that's in contrast with something on film where it we create it and it exists as we filmed it. So it's really interesting to work in these different ways.
That's great. I actually wanted to come back to the maestro for a moment and ask, I think about your job. Kevin calls me all the time, tells me how things are going, and I think about your job all the time, because it seems to me, he says wonderful things about everybody, by the way. It seems to me that your job in a lot of ways has changed the most of almost anybody's job, because you can no longer react to what's on stage as you would with an opera or a ballet, where you're normally adjusting your tempos to the dancer you have. Now you're conducting to a click track and all of these other things. How has this affected your approach to your job and what you do this year?
Well, that is a great question. I mean, I basically have a new job, and there's no two ways about it. Since the summer. When the summer started, we did a few projects where the orchestra recorded a few things at home. When I assembled them together, we did the great thing that Kevin did with his bike and a few other things. And I just taught myself how to do that. So I've done some editing, all that, and all the things we've done this year, all the things we've filmed, they've all been done in a different way. So we started to record some a ballet called Emeralds, and we got the strings done. We were waiting to do the woodwinds, and they were all planned to do in January. And then when COVID really went wild in January, all those sessions were cancelled. And so we had a couple of numbers in, and so when they filmed it, they had a combination of music that we had recorded and we'd put together, and then other ones we hadn't managed to do. So then in the last couple of weeks, we've had to record that with me trying to recreate what's on the recording that they had. So that's one aspect of it. The ballet that is premiering next week, a ballet called Wooden Dimes, was another commissioned score for a big orchestra. And we were due to do that in January as well, and that got cancelled, and that was a huge blow. And so I think it was January the 13th, I sent a letter to the orchestra. They have a 30-day notice in their contract to do stuff. So I sent them a 30-day notice to say, we are all going to be recording this at home to a demo tape from a computer. And you're going to send me your recordings. It's a half hour, just over half hour piece. And so, I mean, from that moment on, January the 20th, I think I got the first file. I've sat in front of the computer assembling an orchestra out of nowhere. I'm literally out of nowhere, and I hope it'll sound okay. It's my final day. This is great to do this thing because it's forced me away from the computer, staring at that screen anyway. But literally, I was up until 2 o'clock last night trying to do a new mix because the film people wanted it to be more even keeled. I made it into a classical piece of music recording, and I'm learning all the time that films require much more consistent dynamic range. And so and then at 2 o'clock the computer crashed and I went to bed, and I just licked my wounds and woke up again, and it was okay this morning. And so I have a different job. I've done some conducting. I haven't conducted more than 15 string players all at once. Since then, I'm used to conducting 70, 80 people in the pit. The orchestra having a really hard time. When we recorded the woodwinds, we've been going to. Luckily, the Conservatory of Music here has this great system. It's called the Dante system, where everybody can sit in the room. It's all connected by Ethernet, and they can have headphones and hear everybody else play. They have a camera on me. I conduct, and so it's kind of like being in the same room, but it's totally not. And so we made some music that way. But it's and then the editors that Leslie will have to collate all those bits together, mix it with the string things. She'll take you back to Skywalker, make it all sound like it was all done in the same room, which is what I'm trying to do with Wooden Dimes. So it's bizarre. I mean, from like with Miles, from a dance point of view, it's like, can you imagine trying to dance the same thing on your own and then filming it and then putting it in and making a picture? It's a new way. I don't know. If we hadn't been forced to do it by San Francisco Ballet, I don't think we would be doing it. I don't know of any other company in the world that's doing it like this. So it's great. I can't wait to get back in the Opera House pit, even if it's just with 5 people, really. And to work with the dancers, as you say, the reaction is totally different. I haven't seen any of the dancers for nearly a year now, except for when I come for a test and see one of them walking down the street. But that's really it. It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, I think the musicians in the house will agree that the difference is quite drastic between before times and now, and we can't wait to do what we do and make our music together. Shifting to the costumes, Susan, I know you are also a dancer. You were with Smulin for a long time, and I'm wondering how costuming is different for dance. What's different when you costume for dance, and how does your background affect the choices you make?
That's a great question. I mean, I talk about it with my husband a lot, actually. I mean, I was very fortunate to find costume design and find sort of my way with sewing and crafting while I was still dancing. And I started my business kind of as I had an injury, and I thought, well, I need some place for this creativity to go. And then as I recovered from almost a year-long knee injury, I started feeling like I was being pulled by this other thing. And I thought, well, maybe I'm kind of finished wrapping up my dreams as a dancer. And I just feel very fortunate that as a costume designer, like fresh off the boat, I just got to hop in front of the line, essentially. Like, because of my connections from being a dancer and working with many choreographers, we have like sort of a mutual understanding about, like, you know, how the ballet world works, first of all, but also just, you know, some kind of personal connection. So I just feel thankful to be able to work in the same community, really. I'm just in a different position. So I think my design sensibility just comes a lot from just wearing costumes and wearing dancewear all the time, my whole life. And I just think I like the way that with film and kind of the way things are going, a lot of my designs are less about spandex and more about really functional garments that look like you would wear on the street, or something that makes sense in a multiple contexts. But having said that, I think for me, it's extremely important that dancers feel comfortable. And so let's say the jackets that they wear, they have to be made with something that has stretch, or something, a gusset that gives them the opportunity to do what they need to do. So that, I think, is maybe one of the differences that I tend to really focus on heavily when I'm creating. But designing for film is honestly even better because you really get to focus on like, okay, what is the stitching? I need to make sure the stitching is carrying the story, or it's like, it's all of it really matters.
Well, and there were some incredible details that I was curious about, so I'm going to follow up, and then I'm going to go to Ricardo because I think it'll lead right into the question for him. I mean, so I'm trying hard not to say too much about the film, but there is bubble gum involved, and you have costumes that echo the color of the bubble gum, and I'm wondering, how that happens. Like, there were several props that are sort of reinforced in color in the costume.
Yeah.
Were you involved with the color design for the props, the bicycle that comes through in one of the shots? All of that stuff relates.
Yeah. I mean, Miles can speak to this too, because he's really the one orchestrating like all of those details. But maybe we got a little obsessed with the color palette that I was using, but it just kind of informed everything. So we thought, well, why not stick with this tight palette and just like let's just keep seeing it everywhere so that it kind of becomes a story itself. And so he was like, okay, I bought paper for the paper airplanes. What colors do you like? Or, and then as a designer too, and like Ricky could speak to that, you don't want to be too on the nose, but you want to have complementing colors and things that it's just playful and fun to be able to, in a film, it's like it is completely visual, and the audience we're being directed to look at what the director or the choreographer wants us to see. And so all of those are choices. Every single thing in the film was a choice, the lighting, the props. So it was fun to be able to make those specific choices.
Well, and
may I ask a
really
question? May I ask a question, Susan?
Yeah.
I don't want to give the game away, but the tree, because did you know it was going to be?
I did not. Miles, you guys saw you went to the MoMA.
The tree was some drama. The tree was definitely like one of those things where, when I scouted the MoMA, it probably was after, the whole company having scouted it many times. And we were just cutting it really close, in terms of season change. Like that tree was, if we had shot that scene 2 days later, 1 day later, we would have had like a quarter of the leaves left on that tree. I mean, it was half as bare at the end of the day. I'm not even exaggerating. You would see a giant pile of leaves around it. It was everyone was looking at each other on the very last MoMA scout, like, oh gosh, I hope that things line up.
But the skirt was exactly the same color. Did you know that in advance?
I did not know. That just happened to be one of the colors in the palette we picked. And I just think that tree, like the whole film, is just it just shows that because you put together people who are inspired and creative, it's like it became more than anything we could have planned. It was just like one of those magical moments. I don't know. Every time I see it, I'm like, thank God I picked that color, but we wouldn't have known.
I get that, because watching the film, I assumed you actually chose that color for the skirt because of the tree. You'll all see what I mean. I mean, it's just amazing. And I saw Ricardo nodding when you were talking about the color palette and making it carry through, and that was kind of a big deal. Another thing I noticed was circles are kind of a big deal, or spheres are kind of a big deal in the whole thing. And there's some really nice framing shots of circles and spheres and camera angles. How did you get some of those overheads? Do you use drones?
We did, yeah. We used a drone the very last day. That was like kind of a last minute decision. We were going back and forth between, we used a crane for a lot of overhead stuff, colloquially called a jimmy jib. And it's different than the standard crane that we use, which is a techno crane. A techno crane can telescope in and out, and a jimmy jib can't. It's a fixed arm. So you can only get up to a certain height to look top down. And on the very last day, when we realized logistically that techno crane wouldn't work for the outside shot of the dancers overhead, we ended up using a drone for that. That was the only time that a drone played on this whole film. But I think it was great. I mean, we only had an operator there for literally 30 minutes. And that one shot really tied that sequence together like so perfectly, you know, because there are so many cutting points, and with the music specifically too, where getting that scope of overhead and then being able to see this like diluted form of colors just kind of like around in one frame, and you start to see a whole nother relationship in dance, I think, when you see it overhead, you know.
Oh,
Yeah, that was
absolutely.
interesting
Yeah,
to play with.
absolutely. And how did you, I mean, clearly with the photography, again, not to spoil too much, but there are some shots where you clearly had to have exact measurements of distances between the performers and what you were doing. How
Yeah.
did you get it to be that precise?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think sometimes, you know, we watch just like movies or, you know, videos or whatever it may be, and you know, I mean, the goal is for no one to think about that, you know, to just like see this precision and just have it kind of feel, you know, natural and fluid. But it just comes down to a lot of prep. It's a lot of scouting. When you know, during COVID times, obviously scouting is a different form of it. It's a lot of scouting online. I had the pleasure of going to the MoMA once before, so I actually knew the space decently well. And a lot of the places that we shot were like some of my favorite rooms in the MoMA, coincidentally. So those were just all kind of, you know, burned in my head a little bit. But yeah, we take a lot of measurements when we're there. You know, when we scout with our whole crew. So my gaffer, who's the head electrician, and my key grip, who's the head of the grip department, that's largely part of their job during prep, is to be able to know the exact size of all these rooms so that when we couple it with seeing the choreography in the space, then we know where our lights are going to go, we know exactly where our camera is going to go. And then in an ideal world, you have all of those aren't so many variables, you know, after you kind of tease everything out, and you're just trying to repeat it, you know, however many times you need till it's perfect, essentially. But you know, thankfully with these dancers, it's not very hard to do that. You do one pass and it's more than you could have ever imagined, you know.
That leads me directly to my question for Kevin, because I think I heard that there were times when you had a few multiple takes of certain things, and I know that you were rehearsing the entire work, obviously, including things that didn't even appear in the film, right? There are entire portions that just aren't there because of camera angles and things. Miles can talk about that later, but my question is sort of. What's the difference between rehearsing it in the studio and then filming it? Because I know you had to do some shorter sections over and over, right? And what's the difference?
Well, I think the rehearsal process was actually very similar to rehearsing anything that we would normally done for a stage. In the end, we would be running the ballet once a day, basically, and then doing notes and corrections in little sections thereafter. And so we're kind of used to doing it all at once and then kind of working on little tidbits. Whereas when we started filming, it's doing those little tidbits over and over and over, and never having the full piece put together all at once. So even a section that you would do fully in a space. So like there's a whole scene in the lobby that we do. And instead of running it all at once, it pretty much always was sections of sections. It was never really done as a complete filming all at once during one take. So that was probably one of the more harder things to get used to at first. And I remember there's one jump that goes to the floor that Esteban and I do, and we did that. There's a really cool shot. There's some cool shots of us doing those jumps. However, that took a lot of takes to really make sure that we got it all right. And that's something that you just would almost never do unless you're making something for film. And so yeah, Esteban and I, we have this duet that we do, and I think we probably at one point we did it maybe 4 times back to back, which one time was already enough for us. So you know, the weirdest thing is when you're doing something live on stage, you know what the audience is seeing. You know how you're going to feel because you've done it before. Whereas when you're filming it, you're kind of cold in the first take because everything has to get set. Usually it's time is kind of around the time that it's going to happen, but sometimes a little later, sometimes. So it's harder to stay warm. So you're usually a little bit colder. Your body is a little bit colder for the first take. And then every take after that, you're kind of already tired. So you're just hoping that you get something, because you just have no idea where the camera is, what it's, that's why we have like great people like Ricardo to film those things, and we can trust that they're gonna put us out there and make us look good, and that different angles that audiences probably wouldn't normally see dance through.
Wow. I know we want to get to the screening, but I just wanted to go around quickly one time before we look at the film, and I just had a question that I'd like each one of you to answer, and it doesn't have to be the perfect answer. I'm just wondering if there's one thing that you would like us to know that was something you'd like us to look for or to listen for during the process of the screening, something you're particularly proud of, or something that took a lot of time and to watch for, or anything like that. And I'm going to start, I think I'll start with Susan.
Ooh, gosh. I would say something to look out for that I find interesting is the way that the colors, like when you see one color that you like, try and find it in other places. Because that's I just had so much fun, like, the belt or the lining of that or the shoes. So that's just a fun thing for me.
Perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Ricardo, how about you?
That's a great question. I probably have a million like tiny answers that by themselves are nothing, like, but my favorite portion of the film is probably after we see the entire group in the lobby and we do Jasmine's entrance to Jasmine's solo. I think color theory, that's really interesting because it's very dynamic. It goes from these muted shades in certain areas to slowly incorporating saturation throughout like the scene. And then it just blooms into this like very naturalistic world when she's outside with the tree. Yeah, I really love that scene, just everything. And we do some fun camera tricks there too, like moving where we rig a Jasmine on a dolly and then the camera on a dolly, and we all move in unison throughout the space. And that started to like shift this perception for me of like, what is a museum, moving the camera with her there kind of felt like an interesting visual. For me, that's the scene I think that maybe people could watch out for.
Great, thank you. Maestro, Martin West, anything we should listen for?
Well, I mean, this is a hard question for me, because what you should listen for is hopefully nothing, because what the biggest goal in my process in this was to make it sound like it was just another recording, a good recording, I should say, not just another one, but just a recording that you would listen to and you wouldn't even say, well, it was good considering. Because we have been working under such different circumstances, and I truly believe we did a really good job. But it became the goal between me and Leslie to, we always call it beat the demo. Miles had a really good recording from the London Sinfonietta, and we were just determined to make it sound better than that. So
perfect.
That's a great answer. I take that answer too.
Oh, how about you, Kevin? Is there a moment we should look for, or that's one of your favorites?
Oh, I love the transitions in between, like normal spaces that I think non-dancers would easily relate to, like MoMA or out in the middle of the woods, to the opera house space. So I think what I really like is seeing how the same steps, because it goes so quickly back and forth to those spaces, how those same steps look the same but also very different, and those different like habitats that the dancers are dancing in. I think that's really kind of super interesting, because I've always liked watching dance on film, but it has a different quality than watching it on a stage. So I think this really shows that contrast of what you can do with dance on film and spaces like the MoMA and the Opera House.
Great, Thanks. And this is probably the hardest question for Miles, so I don't expect you to give the perfect answer, but just one thing.
Yeah, well, I think something I really enjoyed playing with were the things that were outside of kind of my normal scope of choreography. That was all good and fun, and like, of course, we set out to make something that um, would be inviting for people who are not, avid dance watchers to watch. Uh, and so, we sprinkled a lot of like modern art references and a lot of these details um, or yeah, surrounding just the spaces we were in. And I think one of my favorite little Easter eggs that happens like right in the beginning of the film is, you'll see the woman in the red coat, Frances, opening a book, and this is something I worked with my friends to make the title of the book, and it's called the Art of Modern Art: A Clear and Decisive Guide to What You Should Be Feeling. So that kind of like sets the tone of this whole kind of like artifice that can be, how we should be approaching all of these artistic ventures. And I really just wanted to like throw that playbook out of the door and invite people to just feel how they felt about, all of it. So that's just something to look out for. And I'd also say look out for Jasmine's earrings, she's the one in the golden yellow skirt, right? That's a Susan Easter egg that I really love.
And I will tell you that one of our tech crew, as we were testing the video, picked that up, saw
Oh,
that
great.
right away. That was, yeah, so someone noticed immediately. So with that, I want to thank you for this. We're going to watch the film, and we'll switch it to a view so you can see where we are. I know you've seen it a million times. You can get to see what it's like on the big screen. And if you need to take a break, you won't be on camera. And anyone who's able to come back for question and answer afterwards, that'll be great. So, okay, we'll switch over, and I'll get out of the way. Thank you. So I don't know if you heard the applause. Yes or no? Yes? I don't think it would hurt to do it one more time. And I'm so glad we had a chance to roll the full credits. I mean, just imagine if we had all of those people on this Zoom call and the questions we could answer. But I just wanted to, I had one question that I had to ask. Kevin, dancing on wood chips and uneven surfaces, you must really like Miles. What was that like?
Yeah, we all like Miles. So that it was not the easiest thing to do, but we were practicing that movement for so long that I think it worked itself out. I'm sure it's like not as amazing as it could have been if it was like easier and even surfaces, because not only were there wood chips, but there were holes, there were divots, there were random twigs, there were roots. But it wasn't too bad. Actually the hardest part of that day was not that there was mud and things like that, but it was quite cold outside. And some people were lucky enough to have sweaters for their costumes, but I know like Esteban, for instance, was in shorts and short sleeves. So there's actually some cool pictures of people with their UFO kind of jackets to keep them warm in between shots and things.
I did try I went to the park and tried all of the surfaces myself so I could at least give them a debriefing on what they were expecting.
Yeah, I think we found the 4 danceable areas that existed in that entire forest.
Yeah, talk about scouting, right? That would be something you would want to scout. So I wanted to open it up to questions, and we'll do a similar format to Meet the Artist at SFB. So the questions will come from the audience, and then I'll repeat them so that you can hear them. So would anyone like to, I see someone right there.
It was absolutely bravo. But I didn't get the earring thing. The transitions, by the way, I know what you mean, Kevin. They're absolutely amazing. The whole thing is brilliant. Enter it in a film festival. You got to get some awards for this. Oh my God.
So that's more a rave than a question. Somebody just absolutely loved it and said you should be getting some awards for this. But did mention they didn't quite understand the airplane thing. Maybe the paper airplane. Yeah, the earrings. The earrings. Can you just explain that, maybe, Susan?
Sure. Yeah, I picked well, we knew, Miles told me that there was going to be a scene before, most of the other things were finished choreographing, that there was going to be a scene where we get a sense of, we are sort of Jasmine, the Jasmine character, the woman in the yellow skirt. And so we'd get a sense of her looking at the rest of the world or the community or the scene. And so I was like, this is a great place to do some kind of close up with, and she had a paper plane earring. So that was our little Easter egg.
So just another tie-in. I should mention that if you did enjoy it, again, part of the QR code is an opportunity. All of these programs can be purchased for 72 hours of unlimited access. So if you wanted to go, it's $29, and we'll provide a QR code, and that's true for those who are watching this video later as well. We've created a QR code that will direct you to the place where you can purchase it, and then you can watch this as many times as you want. There are 2 other great programs on this as well. So it's 2 other ballets. Sandpaper Ballet, which features music of Leroy Anderson, so you couldn't get much more different. Sleigh Ride and Syncopated Clock and things like that. And then the other one is called Let's Begin at the End, with a wide variety of music and a very different choreographic style. So well worth the purchase. So if you want to see the paper airplane earrings, now that you know what they are, you can buy that and watch it as many times as you want. Other questions? Yes?
I have a costume question about shoes, because dancing not only in uneven surfaces, but in street shoes, are those somehow, made for dancers, or were those street shoes that you guys were dancing in? Because that's insane.
Okay, so the question is about the shoes, and are the shoes in which you're dancing in the outdoor scenes, right? Are those just standard street shoes, or how did you find those?
Yeah, so I did a lot of sourcing from my friends that are still dancers, and Miles. I made Miles put on all the shoes basically that fit him. I said, please try these on this surface and that surface and tell me what you think. But I picked brands that make first of all, they had to look good, and I can kind of do things to make them look how I want them to, but they had to have a little bit of support, be flexible enough that we could get their line, because a shame would be to cover up how beautiful their legs and feet are. So I picked Allbirds, Cole Haan, and Skechers. So those are my kind of go-to shoes for dancers.
And then you did some special dyeing techniques on them, right? I mean, they don't come in those colors.
Yeah, a lot of them I try to keep the work to a minimum, but if they didn't have a particular color, I was able to use a fabric dye called Dynaflow, and it's a little putsy, but I really like dye work within my costuming, so that was a really fun challenge.
Other questions? Oh, yes, Beck.
Yeah, I love the narrative use of non-musical sound, which seems like really different from how stage dancing is thinking about sound. And so I wanted to hear if they had thoughts on how they chose when to include non-musical sounds, the sounds in the room, and that sort of thing.
Okay, so interesting question. I think you heard it, but I'm just going to repeat it for the recording. So the question is about the ambient sounds, not necessarily even just the music, but how you choose which sounds to use and at what spots in the film, and how those choices were made and by whom.
Yeah, that was something that was super exciting to us as we were kind of preparing for this. I know part of them are to help us with basically kind of trimming down the score. Like the break, the kind of like museum audio tour break, we were trying to figure out a way we could kind of get to a new part of the music a little bit more seamlessly. I also think pacing was a really big topic that Ezra, the director, and I were considering from the get-go. Is I know a lot of people will be watching this film maybe on their laptops or their phones while cooking dinner, or taking care of the kids, or doing emails, and we just wanted to try and keep contrast not only with the visual content but also the audio content. And I think it just all of those choices made everything richer. So it was taken to a sound designer after Martin and Leslie finished the orchestral mix, and who kind of gave us the whole gamut, and then we took some things down, we pushed some things up, and yeah, let them kind of use their lens on what they thought it would be. And I thought like the ambient stuff in the transitions between spaces, especially Jasmine out with that tree, you kind of get this ambient sense, and then once you're in the soundstage, it kind of eliminates, and it comes back and forth. And I think it's super effective in just kind of like solidifying all of the messaging that we had.
Yeah, the sound design is also, just to echo on that, it's so important sometimes to like highlight certain things that are in the frame that you wouldn't necessarily think about. Sometimes you have a small detail and it's maybe not so pronounced, and then when there's sound design that's related to that small detail, it immediately like locks everything together. And I think that it was really effective in that way. It doesn't happen that often, so that when it does, it's even more special, I think.
And just a follow-up question for the orchestra. So you recorded the entire work, obviously. You didn't know that the cut was coming, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think Miles said there might be some cuts before we did it, but we did it anyway. And yeah, I mean that bit where the break for the audio thing, we talked about that, Miles, a lot, and making sure that we didn't kind of ruin the music by just stopping. But so then I did Miles had some ideas, and I kind of recreated the music in quick time as Jasmine was walking through Yerba Buena to kind of get through the music, so we didn't lose the essence of the flow of the music as well. But yeah, it's I think the last cut came about a week before the thing, when Miles suddenly told me that he realized there was another cut he'd forgotten about, but it's what we did.
Well, at least you have the recording, right? And it's as good as London.
I'd actually don't know if we finished off the real recording then, because by the time we got the cuts, we put that together. It's all there on the cutting room floor, as they say.
More questions? Oh, yes, I see.
Susan, did you have a team of people to help construct the costumes, or was it kind of you with a lot of late nights in your studio?
Okay, so the question is costume construction. Is it just a solo thing, or was that a group effort?
Yeah, typically I do work alone, design and construct things. I hired one person for my team this year. She's a gal who works for the Richmond Ballet costume shop, and she's brilliant. She helped me with a lot of the MoMA pieces. So I essentially shopped everything, all the fabrics, designs. We had a number of Zoom conversations, and then I just sent everything, and we kind of built it. She did it with her hands, but we kind of did it together. And then San Francisco Ballet has a team as well for wardrobe, and they really, the day of the filming or days of the filming, they were there being able to dress them and any minor alterations and things. So I do not work alone, at least on this project.
And then, Kevin, you have people to help you with the costumes there on scene, right? I mean,
Yeah, we would each have, there was usually about 2 dressers, as well as 2 hair and makeup artists that we would normally get even if we were in the opera house. So they actually probably had to shift their skills a little bit to change the way they do hair and makeup, just specifically for film. And yeah, they would help us get in and out. If we had any issues or problems that we needed fixed, they would be the ones that fixed it. And we even had, when we filmed out in Golden Gate Park, we had like 2 trailers that they would wait in, and we'd come in and they'd redo our hair or touch up our makeup or whatever we needed done. So yeah, it was great to have them there.
great. Other questions? Yes, I see. How long did the filming take total? Any?
In terms of days shooting, I think what was it, 5 days, Miles?
Yeah, five shoot days.
Yeah, 5 shoot days. We had one break in between our, penultimate day and the last day, and that was treated as just a bit of a camera test in the forest. That's when we had everyone rehearsing, and we were doing some more final blocking and things like that. But yeah, 5 days of shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Were you rehearsing to the recording or to something else? To the recording of the ballet orchestra, or?
So I'm sure Martin can speak on this too, but we in our studio in the studio we rehearsed to the London Sinfonietta recording, which is kind of how I chose the music. And I know it took a lot to even have a working recording from the orchestra to get, just because of all of the hurdles it took to get there. And I think we got that maybe the day before we started filming, but it was really important that we had that recording to film to, just so we had a really similar pacing and tempo. And so in that way, it was not unlike kind of heading on stage for an orchestra rehearsal and kind of hearing the music in a new way once or twice, and then kind of giving it a go.
Yeah, I can. So originally, I doctored the Sinfonietta recording to more closely match the tempos which I was going to try and do. So Miles was choreographing to that. And then we were scrambling to get anything together. And so for the filming, we sent a very rough edit with tons of mistakes and no mixing, but had the spirit of the piece, and it was very close to and essentially what we ended up giving, for the actual final cut was just a polished up version of that, significantly polished. It was.
I would imagine that added to the freshness of the performance, hearing the new recording and sort of reworking what you had been doing, and sort of adds to that sort of spontaneity of the piece that you see in the film. Other questions? Yes, over here.
Just curious, what drew you to the music of Steve Reich?
So what, Miles, what drew you to Steve Reich in particular?
I've always been a fan of his. I've created maybe two other ballets to some of his work. I think specifically with this piece, I really love the structure of it. It's as I was preparing for a theater work, it's definitely something that is not typical of a ballet structure, as the first movement is maybe 10.5 minutes, and then the kind of adagio section is 6, and the ending is 3. So it feels very like weighted towards the beginning. But I really like the opportunity that the structure gives, as in maybe especially in the first movement, every 35 to 45 seconds, there's a key shift, kind of this tonal shift that keeps kind of building and building and building. That was super helpful for looking at how I was going to structure this film, as in we always took 2 of those little shifts and introduced a character per each of those in the first 4 minutes. So we would have, Francis in the museum for the first one, and then Francis in the museum and theater for the second one. And then we'd introduce Kevin and Esteban for the third one, and then they'd have their theater moment in the fourth one. And we kind of tried to allow this familiarity to give a little bit of kind of structure and comfort for the viewers. I also just love the minimalism and just kind of like the vibrancy and the driving rhythms of it. I think it gives a lot of opportunity to play with repetition and play with kind of themes and familiarity with choreography. It gives me a little bit more ways to use my imagination, and never really pigeonholes me into like a very, very specific emotional cue. And I think that's really fun to be able to play with the breadth of that.
Great. Other
questions?
Yes.
I have a question about the use of color, which is so obviously a character in the film, and I wonder where your inspiration came from. I remember when I was a kid playing with something called COLORFORMS. It was one of my favorite toys, but none of you are old enough to have played with COLORFORMS. So what inspired color and character?
So the question, and I kind of want to try to word it almost exactly because there was a nice turn of phrase in there, that the color is actually another character. The choice of color and the colors are a character. So, the person asking the question said that she played with color forms when she was little, and you're all too young to know what color forms were. So how did that choice of color and all of that come about or develop? And I'll take anyone to start.
Susan, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to?
Gosh, I mean, we really, I don't know, Miles. I mean, I have a hard time. Someone asked us this question recently, and I was like, I've been staring at this color palette that we chose like for so many months. It's hard to go back to the beginning, but you're right in the sense that I really wanted color for me as it's like my language. So the dancers have their movement, and the musicians have the sounds. And for me, the way I can tell a story is through the shape and the color of what the artists are wearing. And so it just, these colors just really, they needed to be fresh and vibrant and subtle. And, you know, because of the kind of loose narrative that Miles had set up, you know, these characters did kind of take on their own. I knew that there was going to be a duet with Kevin and Esteban, and I knew it was going to be very playful. And then I knew that Frances would be a solo artist and that she would be more, you know, she would be contemplating the museum in a way. And so all of those sort of informed, and I was constantly texting her, asking Miles, like, okay, any more info, any more background on these characters? And in this sense, on this project, I know most of the dancers personally from working with them on other projects or just watching them dance for years. And so I just drew from what I thought that, you know, what complemented their own makeup, their own history. And but yeah, Miles, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I remember having initial conversations with Susan, and this was, you know, just as we were kind of discovering what this relationship would be, and just as we were bringing SF MoMA into the picture. And I know Alexander Calder as an artist was kind of a big starting point for even when I was imagining this as a theater work. And I know what I find brilliant about this color palette that Susan presented is it's very kind of like red, blue, yellow primary color based, which for me speaks so clearly of kind of the art world. And I love that it's just like these very like simple primary color. Like there's no real like purples and greens and oranges. It's really like there's like real clarity there that also it kind of harkens to Alexander Calder's sculptures and mobiles with these like splashes of color, but it feels super fresh and updated because there's all of these kind of, you know, we had like a little bit of minty teal and pink involved, and I thought that was just so brilliant. And it was funny because, you know, I was, and of course I rope everybody else in on choosing a title, just because it's my least favorite part of the creation process. And it's something that we had all been kind of working on for a while. And I was in a meeting with actually one of the orchestra members, Marilyn, and she saw a little clip, and she told me that it reminded her of COLORFORMS, which again was this children's toy from the 50s. And it's funny because I had been looking at popular children's toys because I really wanted to find a title that felt accessible and kind of irreverent and joyful and indicative of this playfulness. And I just loved that reference because essentially it's all of these little blocks of color that you can put together, and the only limit is your imagination. And I feel like that also kind of like harkened to the Alexander Calder sculptures, where you have just these little bits of color all kind of suspended around each other, and then you have the paper planes and the dancers themselves. So I really resonated with that title. I thought it kind of came in at the perfect time.
I want to be mindful of your time. You've been so giving to be here for this amount of time, and I'm so grateful to all of you. And I wanted to maybe close with a quote from one of the reviews that is from KQED and Sarah Hotchkiss, and she has a wonderful quote in here that sort of speaks, I think, to this movie very well. Colorforms opens with a kind of manifesto, a close-up on Principal Francis Chung reading The Art of Modern Art, a clear and decisive guide to what you should be feeling in front of a striped Kelly painting. She throws the book to the ground and the dance begins, a clear and extremely welcome reminder that one's personal, emotional, and physical response to artwork, regardless of perceived educational and class barriers, is completely valid. It turns out, embracing those feelings looks a lot like a grand jeté. So I just love that quote. And I thought that was a nice way to close. And I want to close by saying again, thank you to all of you so much. And there are bio information materials as well as links to all kinds of other enrichment materials by scanning the QR code on the way out or scanning the QR code on the video for those watching later. And thank you again so much. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.